Yeah, so today I'm going to talk about misconnections. You'll understand what that means in a second. A little bit of background about myself. I am the head of user experience at Huge in Europe and Asia. And since I've been at the company forever, it's an agency, and usually people don't stick around at agencies for very long. I've been at Huge for 6 years now, and so when I first started, the brief was pretty much the same for everything we worked on. It was like, we have a large-scale platform build, we need help getting it out. It was typically project-based, very transactional. We'd build one thing, we'd push it out the door, we'd move on to the next thing, and that was it. Over the last 6 to 10 years, the brief has changed quite a bit. Now it has become we need help with digital transformation, or turning bricks into clicks, and all that kind of whatever buzzword you want to use to describe it. And more we have to create connected, participatory experiences that touch kind of every element of a person's life. Everything from social media to connected home to transaction via a desktop computer, mobile, wearables, whatever the case may be, all the way through to above line advertising and brand management. And throughout that process and that evolution, I've noticed a lot of stuff in terms of how you make digital experiences cohesive across all these different touch points, which is kind of the point of my talk today. So, history, bureaucracy, ecosystems, and execution. I purposely put bureaucracy in there because I knew that it would be difficult for non-English speakers to say. So, trying not to be too terribly boring or too terribly long, I'll talk about history first. Also, I never thought I would ever be on an episode of Between Two Ferns, so it's awesome to be here. So history. One of the things I think is kind of crazy is we think about, we take smartphones and all this kind of stuff for granted, but if you think about 20 years ago, which isn't that long ago, this was kind of the state of the art and the kind of flashpoint when I feel like digital experiences really took off. Windows 95 was kind of a really kind of seminal moment in the development of digital in general. It was kind of the point in time when the personal computer really gained prominence with normal consumers, and it was also the point at which the internet really took off and large-scale web adoption really began. If you are old enough to remember getting those AOL discs in the mail and quickly throwing them away, that was kind of the way things worked. Around that time, too, this was the state of the art in terms of what websites look like. This is probably the first website I looked at the source code to figure out how they did that, because circular navigation was not a thing that was really quite possible. When you jump 10 years into the future from there, this was the hottest cell phone on the market, not 10 years ago. And it had no features other than it was thin and you could make phone calls from your pocket. And since then, we now at a point in time, I stole this from Luke Roblowski, there are no longer any meaningful gaps between screen sizes. The difference between a desktop computer, a laptop computer, a tablet, and a phone, you can kind of see here. It's where it sits is kind of the main difference, but all of them support touch gestures, more or less, at this point. All of them support cursor and keyboard now, more or less. And users kind of expect, relatively the same thing from all these different platforms. You cast that against this background where, we constantly have all these expanding choices and blurring channels. The difference between a smart TV and a desktop computer is becoming kind of, very hard to discern. And then as you get down to laptops and tablets, the difference between those two things is becoming less and less clear as well. As you have things like Microsoft Surface, where it literally just pulls the keyboard. You can pull the keyboard off, and the form factor changes, but the software really doesn't. Of course, there's tablets with the iPhone 6 and the whatever Samsung device exists. The difference between tablets and phones is very, very kind of tenuous at best. You have wearables, which are still kind of people are figuring out, and then all these different players in the market competing for space in your entertainment center, whether it's Chromecast all the way through to Xbox, and then to make that even more confusing and complicated, every content provider under the sun is getting into the game in one way or another. You have Popcorn Time, which is kind of abstracting away the complexities of BitTorrent for normal users. HBO and Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon are all kind of trying to turn over how cable providers work, and then every provider of entertainment or communications is getting into the game and kind of changing the way that all those things work. And all of this has happened basically in the last 5 to 10 years. What I think is really cool about this, though, is that human behavior is fundamentally changing. If you think about the iPhone came out in 2007, and since then, mobile users, like nearly 60% of them, are comfortable enough with it to begin using mobile banking on their phone. 67% are using it for turn-by-turn directions. So I had a job at one point where I read a Thomas guide, and that was how I got around in a car. It seems insane to me now, but you've got a phone in your pocket that can get you there. And 99% of smartphone users use their device at home. And then when you think about how you actually use devices, there's all these there's now applications on devices to help you control other devices. And all of this is contextual. So on the left here you have mobile mouse, on the right you have Apple remote, which, Apple, the Apple remote, mobile mouse, sorry, it changes, the UI changes context based on what's going on that other device. And then the thing is, we all expect personalization now, and there's products like Apple Music, which are adding personality to this as well. It's not just machine-generated computer recommendations. They've now started to add curation on top of that to give it a very personal feeling. One of my favorite examples is when I first signed up for Apple Music. I listened to a lot of heavy metal. It was basically one of the first playlists they gave me was songs about you-know-who, and then every song on the playlist was about the devil. And I was like, this is totally off-brand for Apple, but this is perfect. Apple gets me. Satan's way cooler than Jesus. Sorry. But I think what's really complicated, makes my job very difficult with all this kind of complexity and evolving ecosystems, is that 83% of people, and this grows every day because this is from 2014 now, 83% of users expect a consistent experience across devices and say it's somewhat or very important. And I think this is kind of just basically the setup for what I'm kind of my point that I'm here to talk about today. I fly a lot. My remit is basically pan-European and Asia as well. So I have a lot of time to contemplate the shittiness of air travel. And it's one of those places in the world where the usefulness of digital transformation is the most obvious and should be the most beneficial, but it is riddled with the most problems. Airlines pay a lot of lip service to consistency, but they're may or may not be that good at it, depending. So I apologize for what I'm about to do to you, but I'm going to force you to watch an Airlines commercial right now.
Every thought, every movement, carefully planned, coordinated, and synchronized. Performing together with a single, united purpose. That's what makes the world's leading airline flyer-friendly.
Exactly, right? Every time you fly on an airplane, isn't it exactly like a symphony, just how well it all works together? I'm about to shit all over United for the next kind of 2 minutes, but it's nothing against United. It's basically every airline under the sun. It's just I fly on United a lot because I have Star Alliance points. But when airlines talk about this stuff, and in the commercial, and they say every movement, blah blah blah, whatever, the bullshit that they're trying to sell you. They're talking about this. They're talking about macro interactions, right? And these are the things that are in the chain of things that have to happen so you can get from place to place. But they're the macro interactions, and they're driven by human beings, and they're very difficult to scale. And it's pretty obvious. It's airlines are the place where you have the most standardized user journey. Across user segments, cultural differences, language differences, countries, whatever. Like air travel, no matter where you go, Europe, Asia, Africa, North America, South America, it's pretty damn standard. The thing is, like the pieces in between here is where people there's long spans of time rife with nervousness, uncertainty, mystery and peril, depending on where you're going. And the points between booking the flight and checking in, or checking in and boarding, or boarding the plane and your actual flight, and then like your arrival, those are the points where digital should be helping you, or you should be getting a higher level of service, rather than these very transactional points where it's like, hand the guy your ticket and he lets you go through security. And so why isn't this experience great? Like, why is this experience consistently fall down, say for a few decent examples, which are the exception? Which brings me to bureaucracy. This is one of my favorite dudes in the world. Well, I thought that I'd come up with this, actually, and then I found out that this guy came up with it in 1968. Conway's Law. Any organization that designs a system will inevitably produce a design whose structure is a copy of the organization's communication structure. And he was talking about this in terms of building software, but as digital has expanded and evolved into these wildly complex connected systems, this becomes more and more true. And so when you look at airlines, you have what they would refer to as operational efficiency, or as I would put it, you are human cargo. And the way that like United Airlines, or any airline really is structured is roughly like this, in terms of like how your experience works from the minute you book a ticket all the way through, or consider booking a ticket, all the way through to landing at your destination. There's the marketing / IT department, which is basically in charge of all like outbound communication, whether it be social media, the brochures you find in a physical location, billboards, commercials, that commercial you just saw. They deal with all that stuff. When you get to the airport, all that is under airport operations. Reports up to a different, chain of command. A different person in the C-suite has a different budget, a different set of KPIs, and like how they're measured and their goals and success are tracked. And then you have in-flight services, which is basically everything that happens in the air, making sure you get fed, all that kind of stuff. And so when you start to string this together from an operational standpoint internally, that's great. It allows them to like manage and maintain the operations of the business, but you as a user experience this seamlessly or not so seamlessly across. So you have the website, outbound, person comes in, I want to book a ticket, doesn't look half bad, but even within the website itself, they look at this as separate pieces of a puzzle. The booking pipeline is very important, so let's concentrate on that. The website doesn't look half bad. The rest of it looks like a convoluted mess. You can actually see how many points I have, whatever. But when you log in, and I'm arguably one of their most valuable users, but this is what the logged in membership area portion of the United Airlines site looks like as of yesterday. Looks like shit. The other thing about this too is like probably one of the most important channels for you to interact with the brand through while you're actually traveling is either the mobile website, which looks like it was designed in 1924, or the mobile app, which has a lot of the sort of visual sort of like overture that it's consistent, but I can tell you from experience it also works like shit. And then when you get to the airport, you have this amazing thing. One moment, please. Hold on. Just one more moment. Oh, right, yeah. Let me push that again. Yeah, hold on. Hold on. One more, hold on. Okay, yeah, there we go. Oh, shit, I made a mistake. Hold on, backspace. Oh, fuck, there's one here. Shit, back. That'll do. Oh, fuck, back to the beginning again. Why does this happen? Well, whether or not the interface is designed well is another question. But the budget that like puts this kiosk in place, picks the technology, all that kind of stuff, basically does quality assurance as well, is the same team that makes sure that the gas gets put in the plane. It's just not exactly, you're not set up for success. Down in the list of priorities, making sure that engines don't fall off of tubes of aluminum that fly through the sky is probably a little bit more important than making sure that the kiosk works. And the thing, I like to beat up on airport operations teams, I suppose. This is a picture I took when I was in Newark Airport a month or two ago. There's a bar in the Newark Airport. If you ever see this, like, avoid it like the plague. They have these iPads bolted to the bar. So like you're sitting at the bar, right behind the bar is a bartender who you're not allowed to order anything from because you have to do it through the iPad, otherwise your order can't be taken. And you can't pay that person directly either with a cash or a credit card. You have to pay for that through the iPad as well. And this system worked just about as well as that kiosk system you saw before. So not only are they solving a problem that doesn't need to be fixed, I don't know about you, but like when you go into a restaurant, there's typically someone that's very pleasant there trying to bring you booze and jack up their tip as much as possible. So this fucks their life up. But it also ruins the business. This is a Yelp review for that restaurant that I was sitting in. Highly annoying iPad system that is one of the most customer unfriendly contraptions that I've ever experienced. Can't even start to enumerate all the issues. Privacy invading, it tries to take your picture. Gratuities deducted prior to receiving any service, which is slow and impersonal. Limited option for making changes in orders. If you see the iPad in New York Airport, avoid the place like the plague. I just said that, but then that guy said it too. And then there's in-flight, right? So the in-flight thing. Have you ever used one of these that was any good? Like, no, they all suck too. But again, it's like, do you want to make sure that the pilot gets paid, or do you want to make sure that, Jimmy has a good experience when he's watching TV on the plane? And I think like one of the things that, I think of every time I see this is there's this quote from Michael Eisner, which I love a lot. And he basically says, a brand is a living entity, and it's enriched or undermined cumulatively over time, the product of 1,000 small gestures. I think this is the right way for businesses to think about, how you experience the brand and how you interact with them, whether it's a physical interaction, over the phone, or in digital. The big problem is that what you're much more likely to run into when you go into businesses is this kind of mentality around like the minimum business increment. Like how do you kind of tweak the system so that we get one more kind of click, or we get one more sale, or like incremental marketplace sales or something like that. And especially even like within agile development, this has become like one of the things. Test and learn and fail fast has turned into minimum business increment. So that's like basically the portion that brings me to ecosystems and execution. And there's five themes that I'll talk about, and I'll make them quick so you can go drink coffee. The first one is this concept of humanizing your mission. And like I've worked with a lot of product owners at large software companies, and this is like the hardest thing that they have trouble with, is like basically seeing things from a user perspective. As a user experience designer, it's like kind of par for the course, but I think that there's more to it than just seeing it from a user perspective. It's actually humanizing your whole mission. And like the oddball person that I'll actually make reference to of doing this really well is Bill Gates. In 1980, this was the mission statement for Microsoft: a computer on every desk and in every home. I think this is amazing. Like Bill Gates understood the network effect really well. He also understood, like in 1980, computers were a sort of mysterious, daunting thing that like most people, in everyday life weren't super comfortable with. It was a thing that nerds did in their garage, and it was, a little bit scary. But like when you simplify it to this level, all of Microsoft's employees, all of their suppliers, all their partners, and all their customers, and anybody who they were advertising to knew exactly what Microsoft was going for, and trying to make the world a happy, better, whatever place. Which is actually, I think, what led to the point when the government had to actively break Microsoft up because they dominated the market too well. There's more nuance to it than that, and I'm oversimplifying, but whatever. In 1995, there was no other player in the game other than Microsoft. Apple was, on the brink of bankruptcy, and they hired Steve Jobs back the next year to come, pull them out of the shit. The problem with Microsoft, though, is you cut to, 2013, and this was the mission statement. Steve Ballmer, developers, a family of devices and services for individuals and businesses that empower people around the globe, at home, at work, and on the go for activities they value most. It's the most tortured fucking sentence I've ever read in my entire life. You can like see the like white men with khaki pants on and their cell phones clipped to their belt in the boardroom like, well, did we say global? I think that we need to make sure that people know that we're global. What about activities? Yeah, and like I guarantee you that like any person in this room can probably recite to me the Bill Gates version of the mission statement, and probably none of you could repeat that back to me now unless you read it off of this screen. And I worked at Microsoft, so like between 2000 and 2005, I worked there, and it was kind of during the point in time before Vista released, and it was like Windows XP was like still really big, but you could feel there was a little bit of cobwebs in the gears somewhere. And I remember I was sitting in like a big all hands event, and I was probably in my early 20s, and there's some sort of like highly paid Microsoft executive. He said this in the meeting. In the future, you'll have a server in your basement and thin clients throughout your house, serving as your TV, your phone, everything. Sounds really familiar, right? That's exactly what all of our lives are right now, right? Like we all have like a big server in the basement and like thin clients through the house that you kind of interact with when you wake up in the morning. It's not it at all. That's a very like big business, corporate way of looking at how users should live their lives. It's how a business would think about, operating at scale. I think that Apple really got right, is they basically have gotten to that lifestyle, owning the home, connected home technological ideal, but they've done it in a very human way. You buy one Apple device, it works very well by itself, it's beautifully designed, it's super intuitive, but as soon as you buy another one, those two things work together almost, effortlessly, and they both make each other better. You buy an iPad, it's great, it works on its own, you can use it by itself. You buy a MacBook Pro, those two things work together, they work together separately. If you buy one of their wireless keyboards, it works with both things. You basically, they start to lock you into the ecosystem the second you buy two devices. And you can upgrade them, ad hoc. It's very sort of conducive to, the differences in, people's everyday kind of interaction. I think the reason for this is, when I make fun of Steve Ballmer and his developers, is Apple is, if Tim Cook came out and yelled designers, I wouldn't be that surprised about it. Because every time you open an Apple product, the first word that you see is design. This was, the owner's manual or whatever you call it in the MacBook Pro box that I bought a year ago. The first thing you see, regardless of what Apple product is that you buy, is designed by Apple in California. Design is literally the first word that you see. So how do you basically start to create this sort of consistency and get to the Apple ecosystem? Well, I think like the first example here is just creating lateral efficiency. And this is one of the things that I talk to my teams about all the time in terms of like how you bring large-scale, multi-platform, omni-channel, if you want, experiences to life. Obviously, like everybody here is probably familiar with the style guide. They're old as the world itself. This is probably one of the more famous examples. The standards manual for the New York City MTA, created by Massimo Vignelli, forever ago, 1970, I guess. But these things have evolved quite a bit. And like to take the Apple example again, if any of you have ever designed an iOS app, I hope that you have read the Apple iOS human interface guidelines. And if you didn't, you probably did something wrong. But like not only does this talk about look and feel, but they also start to go into interaction patterns and standards for how things like tabs work and how common UI elements should function so that things are consistent not only within your own app but then across all apps in the Apple ecosystem. The BBC also, they kind of are one of the forerunners in terms of creating like the global experience language. I think they were one of the first kind of big companies to do this themselves. We've already had one reference to Google today, so I'll make the second one. Huge actually helped create the site that housed all the material design standards, but Google basically has created a philosophy for how software should be designed in terms of like everything on their platform and their ecosystem, which it transcends look and feel, it transcends like solid, like specific interaction patterns, and like ladders it up a level to how design should work, philosophically. You have Brad Frost, Atomic Design. Probably a lot of you have heard about this. You take a page and you break those unique independent pages that break down into templates. Those break down into organisms. Those break down into molecules, and then you have like atomic elements, say a button, for instance. And this has become like these types of things have become so prevalent that like at Huge we have actually created a standard way of doing it because we make these kind of things so often. You can actually look this up. It's on GitHub. We have this tool called Style Guide, which basically creates a way for designers to actually fiddle with the code that works on the front end of a website, so that you don't have to put in 1,000 Jira tickets to have a front end developer fix like the type that's off by 2 pixels. You can just go in and do it yourself. And the way that Huge actually does these, this is like the tip of the iceberg. What we've gotten into much more now is more the human interface guidelines or material design kind of function of doing things, where you want to basically combine look and feel, interaction patterns, code snippets, prototypes, animation, all that kind of stuff, and have it evolve as newer, more complex, or more interesting problems present themselves. You want to be able to retrofit like the stuff that you've already done. The thing here, though, is that a collection of parts does not equal a product. And if you look at an automobile, for instance, it's a collection of a lot of standardized parts. But if you take all the best parts from all the best automobiles and put them together, you're not going to have the world's best automobile. You're going to have nothing, because those parts won't even fit together. You have to have a cohesive system where everything is designed to work harmoniously. Which brings me to the third point, which is balancing that type of style guide reductivism with systems thinking. This is probably the point that I harp on the most at work every day. There's this guy, Russ Akoff. He has a book that's called something, Akoff's Best or something like that. You should totally read it. It's one of the best things ever. But he has this theory, or he has this thing he says where, if we have a system of improvement that's directed at improving the parts taken separately, you can be absolutely sure the performance of the whole will not be improved. And this guy has a lot of experience. He was kind of like, he's an organizational theorist. He was a professional professor of management science at the Wharton School of Business. He and W. Edwards Deming are like two of the people who are credited for the miracle decade in Japan post World War II. Serious sort of like organizational theory kind of dudes. But what he's kind of talking about here, you have there's a whole concept in digital of A/B testing, and the 42 Shades of Blue, the infamous test that Google ran. But what that does is that gets you to local maximum. That does not tell you what would happen if you threw all that shit out and tried something completely different. And I think that's kind of like the overarching point here. Best practices, being kind of sort of like looking back at what you've done in the past and testing and learning only gets you so far. And Russ Akoff has this thing he calls the wisdom channel, which I can explain very, very briefly. Like at the beginning, you have raw facts and figures. So you have a computer or a hard drive that's full of images, text files, videos, whatever. You know that there's something there. You put it through the basic kind of filter of like human kind of analysis and say, oh, this is all multimedia about animals, or it's all about cats. If you take your theory and experience and apply it to that, you can then create an instruction or how-to. Here's how to put together, a web page about cats. You want to have a title and a headline, and you want to have body copy and supporting images and stuff like that. And then, as you start to put that stuff into the world, you can start to explain, why things take place. It's like, oh, Maru, that Japanese cat with a weird predilection for boxes, is wildly popular, while Garfield, for some reason, people, would rather have Garfield without Garfield. But this is all just basically looking at, what you're doing and making sure you're doing things right. It's like driving the car, while looking in the rearview mirror. It's knowledge and engineering. It's what has been done. It's optimizing the system. What all that system optimization stuff will never do is tell you that you're doing the right things or what the next best thing is. That's where strategy and design comes in, and that's when you can tell know what should be done. And a lot of this is based on intuition, which makes business, very, very nervous. But it's basically kind of embedded in everything that people like us do every day. And I kind of alluded to this already, but number 4, don't over-rely on best practices. Being a UX designer right now is incredibly frustrating because I feel like people, the lazy, shitty UX designers in the world, like, oh, it's best practice. We'll just do that. We'll just copy Amazon because they obviously tested it and they know. And like, newsflash, they fucking don't. But if you've read 0 to 1, Peter Thiel's book, it's really good, and I would recommend it to anybody who hasn't. But there's one thing he says in there. What happens when we've gained everything to be had from fine-tuning the old lines of business that we've inherited? Today's best practices lead to dead ends. The best paths are new and untried. And he's right. Like if you look at I talk about digital being around for 20 years. If you extend that, to the last 100 years. It was not that long ago that they were calling automobiles horseless carriages. And then, within 20 or 30 years of that, we had, the first man flew. And then, within 20 to 30 years of that, like, we were going to space. And now we're on the cusp of, self-driving cars and perhaps the entire automotive industry either, going away or completely changing, by 2050. If you've ridden in a Tesla, it feels like riding in the future. There's no gear shifts, like instant power. It's freaking crazy. I don't know why anybody would shit on electric cars. But what's funny to me is that, like, we're in a point in time right now where, every website looks exactly the same. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but like every time, we have a design review, the first thing I say is like, take the fucking hero image off the top of the goddamn page. Like, I blame, Twitter Bootstrap for doing this to us. There's like 1,000, template generating systems out there, and they all look exactly the same. Always 3 columns. You could have 4 columns here, but you won't. You'll have 3, like everyone else. There's a thing at the bottom you can't really read. If someone did own the copyright to this layout, if that were even possible, they'd be rich. So don't do that. Be original. Try harder. And then the last thing I'll talk about here is the concept of improve it or remove it. And people are incredibly terrible about this. It's easy to beat up on Amazon, but they're a great example. Amazon's very, very good at fulfillment. They're very good at being a retailer that gets you one thing very quickly right now. What they're not good at is everything that surrounds that. And you look at the Kindle, it's one of their marquee products, and this is a page probably most of you, if you own a Kindle, don't even know exists. But it's basically the My Books page, and I took the screenshot the other day. I have no idea what any of those books are because I've never downloaded any of them. But I think they're all the dictionaries that exist that I could have access to, but I don't really care. And not only that, this page just looks terrible. And it's not exactly giving you kind of the brand impression that you want, if you go back to that Michael Eisner quote. The other thing is that there's features that exist that have existed forever that are just completely, orphaned islands that like no one has touched in forever. This is the Amazon discussion forum. Did you even know that existed? It's not actually a bad feature. It's pretty good, and they're actually relatively well trafficked. But you can tell this hasn't been updated since MySpace existed. I make this point just kind of like points out that this guy Frank Spiller's he did this research study where he kind of found that affect, which is inexplicably linked to attitudes, expectations, and motivations, plays a significant role in the cognition of product interaction. The perception that affect and cognition are independent, separate information processing systems is flawed. And he wrote that in a paper called Emotion as a Cognitive Artifact and the Design Implications for Products that are Perceived as Pleasurable. I did not read that article. I read this one, which was the Alistapart article about that article, which distilled it down to this very, very useful diagram. Basically, the myth is that cognition and affect are 2 separate things that operate independently. The reality is that how I think cannot be separated from how I feel. If you perceive something to look bad, you expect it to work bad. If you see something that looks nice, you expect it to work nice. And it's very hard to counteract that first impression or contradict that prejudice. So the last thing I'm going to leave you with here, to kind of wrap all of these kind of disparate thoughts up, is this kind of like concept of disruption and evolution. We talk a lot, and this kind of goes to that Peter Thiel thing of like, in Silicon Valley and digital, in new technology, we talk about disruption all the time. Like Uber is disrupting, the travel industry. Apple disrupted Microsoft. There's 1,000 examples of this, and if you look at like disruption, this is kind of another Russ Akoff quote: "Continuous improvement isn't nearly as important as discontinuous improvement." Creativity is discontinuity. A creative act breaks with the chain that came before it. You don't become the leader, by copying the leader and improving slightly. You do it by leapfrogging. Facebook did not incrementally improve on MySpace. It did something, much better, much more useful, and had a better rollout strategy, and to get every human being on Earth using it, not just hipsters, 14-year-old girls, and bands. And keep up with this type of disruption, which is evolution. And it talks, and kind of, it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. And I think that this is, is true for business. You know, as a company, you have to be able to evolve and react quickly to market changes and even predict them as they come. To hark back to the wisdom channel, but it's true of you and me as well. You know, like as designers, you know, I used to be, you know, working in Flash every day, writing action script, and that skill set is completely useless to me now. And I think that's going to happen again and again and again and again and again. It's like it's basically a risk that you accept when you agree to work, you know, in the digital industry, or, you know, on the bleeding edge of technology. Anytime you do, so yeah, you know, as you know, we all say in digital, test and learn, or as the Marines say, improvise, adapt, and overcome. But I think, you know, keeping this evolutionary approach in mind as you work in your everyday life is important in terms of managing disruption. That's it.